Adventure Time, a show that convinced an entire generation it was watching a goofy cartoon about a boy and his magic dog while quietly smuggling in some of the most genuinely sophisticated storytelling ever put on a children's network. I've talked about many characters, but today I want to talk about something bigger than any single character. Today I want to talk about the show itself, specifically about the moment, or more accurately, the series of moments where Adventure Time looked directly at its audience and quietly stopped pretending to be something simple. Because here's the thing, most people who grew up with this show can point to a specific episode, a specific scene, a specific line that made them put down whatever they were eating and actually pay attention. The moment the mask slipped. The moment something real and dark and unexpectedly sophisticated came through underneath all the candy kingdoms and the talking rainicorns and the Ice King being a pathetic weirdo about princesses. And today I want to walk through exactly how that happened. Not just the obvious moments that everyone talks about, all of it. The full picture of how a show that started with a 12-year-old yelling mathematical became one of the most emotionally complex pieces of animation ever made. This is the complete breakdown. Let's get into it. Let's start with season 1, because season 1 Adventure Time is genuinely pretty goofy, and I mean that with complete affection. Finn is 12, he's got the big white hat, the little backpack, the boundless enthusiasm for punching evil in the face. The Ice King is a bumbling, lonely weirdo who kidnaps princesses because he wants a girlfriend. Jake stretches himself into ridiculous shapes and says ridiculous things. Everything is colorful and loud and silly and fun. And if you were a kid watching this in 2010, you were probably just enjoying the ride. Fair enough, that's what it looked like on the surface, but even in season 1, if you were paying close enough attention, the show was already doing something slightly strange, something that didn't quite fit the kids' show mold no matter how hard it was dressed up to look like one. Take memories of Boom Boom Mountain. On the surface, it is a completely absurd episode about Finn trying to stop a crying mountain from being sad because it has to watch people roughhouse nearby. Silly premise, classic Adventure Time energy, the kind of episode you'd describe to someone who'd never seen the show and watched their face do something confused and delighted at the same time. But buried inside this episode, almost as an afterthought, is a flashback. Finn as a tiny baby lying completely alone in a forest while strangers walk past him and actively tell each other not to look at him, not avoid him because he's dangerous, not express concern, just don't look. That is not a kid's show moment. That is a quietly devastating piece of character writing wrapped inside an episode about a mountain with feelings, and the show doesn't pause on it, doesn't swell the music dramatically, doesn't make it a whole thing. It just drops it in there and moves on like it's nothing, like it's just another detail, like it didn't just tell you something genuinely heartbreaking about the protagonist in between jokes about roughhousing. That's the first tell. The show was always willing to go somewhere real when you least expected it, and it was always going to do it quietly without announcing itself, trusting you to feel it even when it didn't stop to explain it. Then there's Ocean of Fear. Finn is terrified of the ocean, and the show gives this fear a physical form. The Fear Feaster, this obnoxious little cloud that crawls out of his belly button and whispers horrible things to him. Immediately funny image, classically weird Adventure Time visual. But what the Fear Feaster actually does is not funny at all. He finds Finn's deepest insecurity and weaponizes it. He tells him that because he's afraid, he will never be a true hero. He gets inside his head and makes him feel small and inadequate and unworthy. In a villain in an adult drama, we'd recognize that immediately as sophisticated psychological manipulation. But the real turning point, the moment most people who grew up watching this show can identify as the one where something shifted, is the season 2 two-parter. Mortal Folly and Mortal Recoil. The introduction of the Lich. Adventure Time had monsters before this. It had villains and stakes and danger, but they were always fun stakes, the kind you don't actually worry about because you know the vibe of the show and you know it's all going to be fine and probably kind of silly by the end, and then the Lich shows up and the show does something it had never done before. It scared you, not in the jump scare way, not in the loud dramatic villain entrance way, in the quiet, hollow, deeply unsettling way that real fear actually works. The Lich doesn't rant. He doesn't perform. He speaks in this low voice that sounds like it came from somewhere past the edge of everything, and he says things like, You are alone, child. There is only darkness for you. To a 12-year-old boy in a cartoon on Cartoon Network on a Saturday morning, and the show lets it land. Doesn't immediately cut to a joke to release the tension. Doesn't soften it. Just lets Finn actually be afraid in a way that feels real and uncomfortable and not fun at all. And then the Lich takes control of his mind and walks him toward the well of power, and Finn can't stop it, and we genuinely don't know if he's gonna be okay. The only thing that breaks him free is a sweater, a pink sweater Bubblegum gave him because she didn't want him to get cold. And yes, it is funny on the surface, but what the sweater actually represents in that moment is Finn's emotional connection to someone he cares about. The power of that connection literally breaking through mind control, and the show treats it with complete sincerity. It doesn't wink at the camera. It plays it straight. The sweater matters because the feeling behind it matters. That balance, genuine darkness and genuine silliness held together in the same moment without either one undercutting the other. That is the thing that made Adventure Time unlike anything else on television at that time. And Mortal Folly is the first episode where it fully clicks into place and you realize this show knows exactly what it's doing. Season 3 is where the show really starts peeling back the curtain. And it does it in multiple ways across multiple episodes, each one adding another layer to what was already there. The episode that does it most explicitly, most deliberately, most unforgettably is Holly Jolly Secrets. Because Holly Jolly Secrets is the episode where Adventure Time looks you directly in the eye and says, you know that bumbling, pathetic idiot you've been laughing at for 2 full seasons? Sit down. We need to have a conversation. The Ice King has always been a joke. Pathetically lonely, desperately annoying, kind of funny in the way that deeply sad people can sometimes be accidentally funny when you don't look too closely. But Holly Jolly Secrets turns him into something else entirely. It turns him into a video diary. A man sitting in front of a camera recording himself as something slowly takes his mind away, trying to document what's happening while he still has enough of himself left to know that something is happening at all. That line, the way he says it, not dramatic, not theatrical, terrified, quietly, privately terrified in the way people get when something is wrong and they don't fully understand it yet and they're not sure who to tell. And just like that, in one moment, every single Ice King scene you have ever watched gets recontextualized completely. Every kidnapping, every pathetic rant about wanting a princess, every failed attempt at connection, every moment you found him annoying or ridiculous or pitiful. None of it is comedy anymore. It's a man who doesn't know who he is, acting on impulses he can't trace back to their source, reaching for something he can't name because the crown took the name along with everything else. I have a full video on Simon Petrikov because his arc genuinely deserves its own complete breakdown. But for the purposes of this video, Holly Jolly Secrets is the episode where Adventure Time officially stopped being comfortable, where it made you feel something about a character you'd spent 2 seasons dismissing, where it reached into a joke and pulled out a tragedy and held it up to the light without apologizing for either one. That is not a kid's show move. That is gutsy, sophisticated, patient storytelling that most adult dramas don't have the courage to attempt. Then there is what was missing, and I want to spend a moment here because this episode operates on multiple levels simultaneously, and the show is completely aware of all of them. On the surface, it is an episode about a door lord stealing everyone's most prized possessions and the gang having to perform music together to get them back. Fun premise, classic adventure structure, plenty of good jokes, but underneath that structure, the episode is doing something quietly radical for a children's cartoon in 2012. It's exploring the emotional lives of its characters with a vulnerability and specificity that most shows aimed at adults don't bother with. Marceline singing to Bubblegum, the things people's prized possessions reveal about what they actually value when nobody is asking them to perform. Finn keeping a lock of Bubblegum's hair because moving on is harder than he lets anyone see. This episode made people feel things they weren't expecting to feel watching a Cartoon Network show. And the conversations it started about the characters, about the relationships, about things way beyond the plot of the episode itself went far beyond anything a simple kids show generates. Adventure Time was not making content for children in this episode in any limiting sense of that phrase. It was making content for people, and it was trusting that kids were people too, But the single most important episode in the entire show's transition, the one I would point to without hesitation, if someone asked me to pick just one moment where Adventure Time definitively became something more than a kid's show, is I Remember You Season 4, written by Rebecca Sugar. And I will go to my grave saying that this is one of the most emotionally sophisticated 22 minutes of television ever produced for any audience at any age on any network. Here's what happens. The Ice King goes to Marceline wanting help writing a song. He has all these old papers, notes, scraps, and he can't quite figure out what to do with them. And as the episode unfolds, we realize, and Marceline realizes, that these papers belong to Simon. They are the last physical remnants of the man he used to be, stuffed chaotically into a scrapbook by someone who no longer has the clarity to understand what they mean or why he kept them. He doesn't know that. He doesn't know who Simon Petrikov is. He doesn't know why Marceline keeps looking at him with that specific kind of grief, the kind you only feel for someone you loved who is still technically standing in front of you but isn't really there anymore. He just wants to write a song. He just wants a friend. He genuinely cannot understand why being around him hurts her so much, because he is not talking about the song. He is talking about everything. He has this overwhelming, inarticulate sensation of loss and longing, and he cannot find where it's coming from because the source has been buried under 1,000 years of magical deterioration. He knows something is missing. He has always known something is missing. He just cannot locate it anymore. And Marceline, who carries 1,000 years of memories with him and without him, has to stand in that room and figure out how to love someone who is no longer who they were, how to grieve someone who is still alive, how to hold space for an absence inside a presence. If you have ever watched someone you love disappear into illness, neurological, psychological, physical, you know exactly what Marceline feels in that room. The show took that experience, one of the most painful and specific and human experiences that exists, and put it inside a cartoon. And it did it with more grace and more restraint and more genuine emotional intelligence than most content made specifically for adults about the same subject. That is the moment, that 22 minutes. That is when Adventure Time stopped being a kid's show, if it ever fully was one at all. Seasons 5 and 6 are where everything the show had been quietly building finally breaks the surface completely. And I don't want to spend too long here because I have full videos on both Finn's arc and Simon's arc that go deep into these seasons, but there are specific moments that belong in this conversation. The Lich's wish, when he finally gets to Prismo's time room, the one place in existence where reality itself can be rewritten, the room outside of time where anything is possible. His wish is not dramatic or theatrical or emotionally charged in any way. It's delivered in the same quiet, hollow voice he always uses, clean, precise, completely calm. The extinction of all life, not a kingdom, not power, not revenge against anyone who ever fought him. The extinction of all life, period, full stop, in a show that started with a kid body slamming gnomes and yelling about how hot someone is in a non-sexy way. The distance between those two things is the entire journey of Adventure Time, and the show earned every inch of it. Then there is Finn losing his arm, which I've talked about at length elsewhere, but cannot leave out of this conversation because the show does not soften it, does not cut away, does not give you a triumphant hero moment immediately after to make you feel better about it. It shows you the stub. It shows you the flower that grows from it. And it sits with Finn in his blankness because that is what certain kinds of loss actually feel like, and the show knew that and decided you needed to see it even if it was uncomfortable. A kid's show gives the hero a win and moves on. Adventure Time gave its hero a flower where his arm used to be and left you to figure out what that meant. And then there is the world itself, which I think is the most underrated piece of evidence in this entire conversation, because most people focus on the heavy character moments when they talk about when Adventure Time got dark, and those moments are absolutely valid and absolutely worth discussing, but the show's most quietly devastating move was not any single scene or any single line, it was the world building. The further Adventure Time goes, the more it becomes clear that the Land of Oo is not a magical fantasy kingdom that has always existed this way. It is a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The Candy Kingdom is built on ruins. The ocean has drowned cities underneath it. The Mushroom War happened. Human civilization ended. And every single cute and colorful and delightful thing in this world is growing on top of that history the way wildflowers grow on a battlefield, beautiful and alive and completely ignorant of what they're rooted in. The show never announces this. It just keeps revealing it slowly. A drowned building visible in the background of a Susan Strong episode. A destroyed vehicle half buried in the earth like it's always been there. Ancient human artifacts that nobody remembers the purpose of anymore. A whole underground city where something used to be. So when did Adventure Time stop being a kid's show? Honestly, I don't think it ever fully was one. I think it was always something stranger and more ambitious and more honest than that. A show that used the visual language and the energy and the structural conventions of a kid's show as a vehicle to carry things that kids' shows don't usually try to carry. Loneliness, identity loss, grief that doesn't resolve cleanly, abandonment and what it does to a person over time, the end of civilization and what grows in its place, what it actually means to keep going when everything has already fallen apart once. Leave a like if this one landed the way I hoped it would. Subscribe if you're new because this is exactly what you'll find on this channel. I'll catch you in the next one.